Hey, welcome to Janktown. Today we'll be covering Valgavoth, Harrower of Souls. Now if you haven't visited the channel before, we like to do a commander analysis, get into the deck's themes, and we end with specific card choices. So if that sounds good to you, I hope you can subscribe, and let's get into it. So there were a few ways I thought about building our Valgavoth deck, and I just wanted to take you guys through my thought process. And the first thing that probably drew my attention, probably the flashiest thing about this card, is that it draws cards when our opponents lose life. However, before we just slap on a bunch of incidental life loss effects, I think the key thing to keep in mind is that this triggers only for the opponent whose turn it is. And so this means, best case scenario, we probably draw a maximum of 3 per turn cycle, which is still really good, but it's just not as busted as one might think, especially in 2024. Still, we'd want to maximize that, which means when it comes to our opponents losing life, for one, we want their effects happening on their turns, and two, we also want this to be consistent. So it's gotta happen almost guaranteed. So the creatures that tap themselves to deal damage to all opponents, just not a great choice, because we essentially only draw 1 from them in a turn cycle. Now, something I don't think gets talked about enough though is how quickly Valgavoth grows himself. He enters as a 4/4, sure, but by the time we get our turn back and now he can attack, he's already likely a 7/7. That's a lot of power in the sky, and that's a real threat. 7 is also more or less the sweet spot when you want to talk about commander damage kills, because that's 3 attacks and you've hit 21. And this is why I think the role we want him playing in our deck is that of a finisher. He's our primary win con. But he doesn't play the typical finisher that we usually see, where we have to build up our pieces first, build up our board, and then he'll just swoop in, finish the job. Nah, he needs to stay on the field, watch all of this chaotic madness that's going on, and then deliver the coup de grace. Fortunately, he is only 4 mana value, which I think is just the perfect spot on the curve for him. This does mean that a key consideration for our first 3 turns is to set up, bring our life loss engines online, and so having pinging effects or just these consistent life loss effects at 3 mana value or less is gonna be really important. Last thing before we move on, it just supports why I like Valgavoth as our finisher, is that these low mana value pingers, while they are gonna be consistent, they don't really pack that much of a punch, especially when everyone's starting life totals at 40. They do chip away, they do decent damage over the course of a game, but the ones that really deal a lot of damage, these are usually higher on the curve. They can close out games, but if you've already been drawing with Valgavoth and as a result growing him, I think that's just generally the path of least resistance when trying to make ourselves into a threat. Now that we have a good idea of how to pilot our commander, when it comes to themes, we'll have our usuals of ramp, removal, and draw, but also go into card themes for creeping dread, jump scare, defense, and something we like to call UBP, or utilities, bombs, and pets. Let's start with ramp, and the curve of our deck is actually pretty low, averaging to below 3. Now, aside from 36 lands, we're also running Soul Ring, Signet, Bauble, Felwar Stone, just staples that go in every deck, and we're also running Rakdos, Talisman, and the Signet, because they're just really good turn 2 plays. Thought Vessel though is going to be an important card since we'll probably be drawing a lot of cards, and a little higher on the curve is Sadbot, who can ramp us a land, and it's just a terrific chump blocker because he can refund us a card. Cryptolith Fragment, it pings opponents for 1, and if we find ourselves in an endgame where life totals are really low, it becomes this really janky win con where 3 damage really hurts. Last on the ramp list is an equipment called Reaver Cleaver. Now, it's gone down in price since being reprinted, and it can make a lot of treasures. We aren't bringing many creatures in our deck, but giving our commander trample and being able to produce a lot of treasures is just a nice side prize. We're bringing a pretty decent removal suite because we don't want to die from just random crap from our opponents, and so Feed the Swarm, K-Swarp, and Vandal Blast, all forms of non-creature removal. For creature removal, Slaughter Pact, Terminate, and Force of Despair, I really value mana efficiency here, so even cards like Snuff Out, Deadly Relic, these are really good, but they're just a little too expensive. And we don't really mind pitching a card to Force of Despair because ideally we're drawing a lot of cards. I really value wipes though, and so we're bringing about 5. First one being Consume the Meek, just an instant speed conditional wrath that just sweeps away tokens and small creatures. It's great from saving us against these go wide decks. Chandra's Ignition, just a powerhouse of a card that pairs really well with our commander. It can sweep away entire boards and maybe even some players. And Nightmare Unmaking and Mandate of Abaddon just take advantage of our commander's abilities too. The Nightmare, because our hand is probably going to be pretty well stocked, and so we'll save our commander while exiling everything else, and the Mandate just stomps on all creatures smaller than our commander. Last is Pestilence, one of my favorite spells of all time. It is sometimes a little mana inefficient, but being able to deal the life loss plus being able to sweep the board like consistently is gonna be really, really powerful. Now, despite our commander being a giant draw engine, being able to do that without him is still gonna be important to ensure a smooth game. Night's Whisper and Read the Bones are low mana value draw spells that can make sure we hit our land drops early, and Demand Answers and Highway Robbery also draw us too, although we do have to discard a card, but still, nice early game spells. For some repeatable ways to draw though, we have Phyrexian Arena and Bloodgift Demon. They draw us an extra card in our upkeep, just solid value, and while the priority is to get Valgavoth out as soon as we can, these are some great follow-up plays on like succeeding turns. Last couple of cards is Karazikar, recently dropped in a secret lair, and the gold part of this card is nice and quirky, but we don't really need to attack with Karazikar himself. It could be our commander attacking, but the draw ability is something I've already seen draw a lot of cards unexpectedly. Karazikar can draw like a max of 6 cards in a turn cycle, especially if each of our opponents like swing to the other 2 players, plus pings them too. And then there's Obnixilis from Aftermath. Huge threat, grows even faster than Valgavoth, and he can act like a second commander in the 9/9. He gives us a ton of impulse draw because he counts each incidence of life loss, albeit life loss of denominations of 1. And so yeah, just a bomb of a card. Seeing our commander grow more powerful while we draw cards is gonna be enough to fill our opponents with dread. And so these pingers are gonna be like that scary music that always tells you that something's about to happen. Roiling Vortex, Sulfuric Vortex, and Forsaken Wastes all trigger on our opponent's upkeep, and so they're sure to take some damage. It's inevitable, it's unavoidable, and again, these can all come down at turn 3 before we play Valgavoth. After the upkeep step is the draw step, and Razorkin Needlehead and Underworld Dreams ping our opponents for each card they draw. They are color intensive though, so hopefully your mana base is on point, but again, inevitable, unavoidable. Now during their turn, they're also bound to cast a spell, and so Pyrostatic Pillar, Spell Shock, and Rug of Smothering all ping our opponents when they do. Again, everything so far has been mana value 3 or less, so if you draw any of these in our opening hand, they're things that we can play before we run out Valgavoth. And something that they're gonna do as well is make a land drop, so Ankh of Mishra has us covered here. Of course, if they do miss a land drop, that probably means they're behind, in which case, punish them by attacking them with Valgavoth. Now, a card that isn't 3 mana value and below is Mana Barbs. And I still included this in the deck because I think it's such a powerhouse of a card. It's just so punishing, and if we get like a turn 2 mana rock, we can still play this on turn 3 and get our commander out in time at turn 4. Now, something more specific are Bloodseeker and Rampaging Ferocidon, just ways to hit our opponents for having creatures enter their battlefield. And on the flip side, if they don't play creatures, then that means they don't have blockers, in which case, again, punish them with Valgavoth. Last on the list is a 4-drop in Malgus, God of Slaughter, one of the OG group Slug commanders, and I think he's still really good. Of course, opponents can choose to sacrifice a creature, but in my experience, most don't. And at 4 mana value, he does come out a little later than we'd want, so yeah, prioritize playing Valgavoth first, and then we can run out this guy. So our opponents know it's coming, they're probably bracing themselves for the worst, so we also need to make sure that jump scaring our opponents with Valgavoth is gonna be effective. Silver Shroud Costume and Whisper Silk Cloak both give Valgavoth unblockable while also protecting him with Shroud. The unblockable is needed because sometimes flying just isn't evasive enough, and the times it is though is when we play Dust Corona. It's just a 1 mana value aura that essentially makes Valgavoth unblockable since he's a flyer. Brotherhood Regalia and Key to the City, both ways to also make Valgavoth unblockable. The Regalia gives Ward 2, so not as absolute as Shroud, but at least we can target Valgavoth with our own spells. And Key to the City is just another potential source of card draw, or like rummage draw, because we discard and then we draw. Not the best, but just nice to have in a pinch. Last 2 cards are Temur Battle Rage and Embercleave. Both give double strike, both give trample, and both are played at instant speed. Just a scary thing to have and play against our opponents. Now, draining the table isn't going to make us a lot of friends, and so we need some defenses if our opponents decide to opt for player removal instead of targeting our board. Crawl Space and Silent Arbiter just help us stymie aggressive decks or like these snowball decks while not hurting our main game plan. And Carter Doom Scourge buys us a turn against aggression by goading all of our opponent's creatures while also pinging opponents if an attacking creature of theirs dies. Vengeful Ancestor, a repeatable source of goad, particularly if there's like one scary threat you want to avoid, while again still pinging an opponent when a goaded creature attacks. Players also hate attacking unprofitably, and so I found Wall of Souls to be a surprisingly good blocker. Mirroring the damage back is probably rarely gonna happen, but it's a 0-4 that works as a pretty good deterrent. Revenge of Ravens fogs like this whole horde of 1-1 attackers that might come our way, and again, likely sending small value attacks elsewhere. And Kazul makes us a blocker for each creature going at us. If it's got evasion like flying, trample, yeah, we're probably screwed, but it does make for creating a chump blocker against most creatures. Lastly, it's Sun Droplet. It's an innocent looking 2-drop, but the life gain triggers on every upkeep. So yeah, we'll be eating some attacks, we'll be pinging ourselves with our own, like Ankh of Mishra, our own Spell Shock, but hopefully we can slowly regain some of that life back and be at less risk of dying versus our opponents. UBP time, rounding out the decklist with some utility spells, are a pair of shoes to protect our commander. Greaves, boots, you can't go wrong. The haste isn't really so necessary, but they are both cheap and effective ways to protect Valgavoth against targeted removal. Gix's command, I think it's a super versatile spell. It's a board wipe against small boards, it's a reanimator spell, it takes down big boys, and the mode I really like is the 2 counters and lifelink. In grindy games, lifelink can be backbreaking as we go from like dying to a stiff breeze to being healthy again. Similarly, Rush of Vitality also gives lifelink with the upside of giving our commander indestructible, and the +1/+0 can actually sometimes be relevant too, since Valgavoth goes from like 4 power to 7 power to 10 power. Giving him that +1 to make him 11 power puts a player in double strike range if we want to take them out. Last couple of cards are Wound Reflection, a game ender of a card, and it can really make the effect of those pingers we have add up super quick. And a new card from the set, Grievous Wound, where each ping essentially halves the enchanted opponent's life total. This is a triggered ability, and so the damage happens first. So if let's say they get attacked by a Muldrifter and they go from 40 down to 38, they'll get halved down to 14. Then if they get hit by a Muldrifter again, they take another 2 damage going down to 12, and the wound brings them to 6. A third Muldrifter hit takes them down to 4, and then half it down to 2, and then the next hit, they're practically dead. 4 Muldrifter hits, that's all it takes. Thanks for stopping by Janktown. I hope you guys enjoyed that video, and if you found it useful, it would really help me out if you could leave a like, share it, and hit subscribe. I always forget to say this at the end of videos, but the decklist is available in the description down below. Now, if you found this whole like life losing thing interesting, you might also be interested in checking out my primer for Rowan. It also deals with life loss, but this time using our own life loss to be able to power out our deck. Stay inspired, friends, and I'll see you soon.